So, just over 2 weeks ago now, the Supreme Court ruled that protecting the status of LGBTQ people from being fired for those reasons, upholding their status as a protected class. This was a wildly popular move that some people viewed as a very bad idea, including one Michael Moreno. And I know nothing about Michael Moreno. I came across this just looking for shitty videos to go over. Doesn't look like he uploads that often. Oh, he did a response to Surus. Interesting. Stumbling towards the kingdom of God. Okay, so we know a little bit about what he's about with that. So, he thinks the Supreme Court's LGBTQ ruling is immoral. Funny that. Michael, take it away.
On Monday, June 15th, the Supreme Court ruled in a 6-3 decision that employers are legally prohibited from firing employees for being homosexual or transgender, keeping in line with other anti-discrimination laws associated with the Civil Rights Act, like outlawing workplace discrimination based on race and gender. Now, I know this is going to be a hot take, and I'm probably going to lose some subscribers for saying it, but these laws are bad. They shouldn't exist. Let me explain. First, let me make it clear that I'm no...
Yeah, you need to explain why it's bad that they can no longer fire people for being gay or transgender. That's an inherent part of their being, of their humanity, of their person.
Fan of discrimination. I think that employers who want to hire and fire based on irrelevant personal characteristics are wrong. I don't think they should do it. That being said, what people should do and what they should be allowed to do are not the same thing. For example, I don't think people should watch porn. I think it's degenerative, but they should still be allowed to because it's their life and they're not harming me. So why should I have a say? I don't think people should drink alcohol or smoke weed.
How does a company being unable to fire someone because they're gay harm you? Please to be explaining this.
Or eat junk food. But again, they're not harming me and it's their life, so I don't get a say. Now, does this mean that I'm complacent with immorality? That I just let it happen without saying anything? No, I try to show people why these things are bad and help them stop doing it. But I know that at the end of the day, it's their choice because it's their life. And while business owners probably...
Notice how he's very much setting up a homosexuality or transgender is a choice and not an innate part of their lifestyle. This is typical of these kind of people, these religious fundamentalists, arguing that things like homosexuality, like transgender, these are choices people make. These are lifestyle decisions, and thus choosing to do them is immoral or degenerate or whatever word they want to use.
Probably shouldn't discriminate. They absolutely should be allowed to because it's their business. You should be allowed to do whatever you want with your business for whatever reason you have. You're not obligated to hire anyone, and no one is entitled to work for you. What you do with your own life and why is entirely up to you. This is the principle of liberty, that all people should be allowed to follow their own pursuits, which logically necessitates that they cannot use that ability to take it away from other people, since it applies to all people. This is why...
But we have a significant issue with people discriminating against people based on things which are inherent to their person and not things they can easily change. I mean, would you make the same argument about being able to hire a black person or fire a person because they are black? Maybe you would, but I've not seen any particular racist sentiments from this person so far. So I'll give them the benefit of the doubt that they're not racist. So they would object to someone being fired because they're black or because they're Latino or because they're Muslim. But the idea of firing someone because they're gay, well, that's just a choice. It's not. It's factually not.
Why people have freedom of speech. It's why they have freedom of religion, which is essentially freedom of morality. People are allowed to say things that you don't agree with, believe in gods that you don't think exist, hold values that you don't. Just because you think something is wrong doesn't mean you get to force that on someone else. Your opinion, no matter how correct it might be, does not take precedence over human rights. There's no reason...
Correct. Yes, exactly. And it's not someone's opinion that they're gay. That is how they feel that is how they are attracted. They cannot change that, as much as many may wish they could, due to where they grew up and how they grew up and the environment they live in still. You can't stop being gay, just like for the vast majority of people, they can't stop being transgender. Well, it's a little different with transgender because, statistically speaking, if they keep suppressing it, eventually the problem goes away permanently. And that's what happens when you create a society which fosters such ill regard towards gay and towards the LGBTQ groups. By rejecting their position, by claiming that they cannot be, that what they're doing is a choice and not an active decision, or not an innate part of their being, you're creating a situation where these people will be cast out, they will be persecuted, and they will suffer tremendously for it. But it doesn't harm you, so what do you care?
And why you or me or anyone else should have any say on what someone else does with their own life. And it takes a profound amount of arrogance to think otherwise. But Michael, it's not just their life, other people are involved. Sure, technically other people are involved to the same degree that other people are involved when a girl refuses to date someone. That doesn't mean that she's violating their liberty. Other people are involved insofar as she is protecting her rights from other people. They weren't entitled to a relationship with her to begin with, and the same applies to businesses. The only time involvement matters is when there's harm. If they're not harming you, you don't get a say. But Michael, they're harming people when they discriminate against them. No, they're not. This is a fundamental misunderstanding.
What? When gay and lesbian transgender people get discriminated against, they're not being harmed? Whew! That's a hot take. Let's see how he justifies this.
Understanding of the difference between not helping someone and harming them. The lack of a positive is not a negative. The lack of +1 is not -1. It's just 0. And choosing not to help someone is not harming them. It's neutral.
Oh, so by hiring a gay person, you're helping them. But by firing them because they're gay, you're just not helping them anymore. Is that really the argument here? What the fuck? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
If I don't give money to a homeless person, that's not the same as me taking money from them. And so if I don't hire someone, I'm simply choosing not to help them. I'm not harming them, and I'm not violating their liberty. Now you might respond by saying, okay, but what about when you fire them? You're putting them in a worse position than they were before, since they had a job and now they don't. So you've harmed them. Also not the case. Giving a positive and then taking it away is still not negative. It's neutral.
Yep, that's exactly his argument. You're helping them by hiring them, but it doesn't harm them to be fired. Even though this ruling will create a situation where people can be discriminated, where the opposite of this ruling, can create a situation where people would just not hire gay people. So they are being discriminated against based on a specific aspect of their being, which they have no control over. But you don't see that as a harm. Wow, holy shit.
If I let a homeless person stay in my house and then change my mind and kick them out, I haven't harmed them. They were already homeless to begin with. I've simply neutralized the situation. Sure, the act of neutralizing the situation, of going from 1 to 0, required negation, but the overall scale is still not in the negatives. If my parents are paying for...
Wow. I mean, it really kind of depends, but isn't it good Christian morality to help your neighbors, help your brothers? I would think that anyone stumbling towards the kingdom of God would look down on someone who kicks a homeless person out of their home, unless they were like stealing from them or some other mitigating circumstances, which he is not indicated here. But even so, to say that it just takes it back to 0 is a little disingenuous. Having a solid address, having a place where they can regularly shower and clean their clothes and their bodies is a net benefit. And removing that, even if it's taking them back to where they were before you took them in, is still harm to that person. Now, maybe it's not as bad as leaving them on the street, but it is still a harm to that person. But you seem to be viewing everything in black and white and dichotomies. True, Dodge.
For my bills, and then suddenly they stop. They haven't harmed me. They've just stopped helping me. And so if I hire someone and then fire them, I simply give a positive and then stop giving a positive, going right back to zero, neutrality. Now, the next criticism is usually an appeal to the potential consequences that could come from allowing this, like a hypothetical
that
world
whole
where all of the
argument was garbage, because it's ignoring how being fired can significantly impact someone, particularly in our current economic situation, where the unemployment rate is absurdly high, where a lot of businesses aren't open or aren't going to reopen thanks to the plague. Firing someone is never a neutral act. It almost always causes harm to the person being fired. Now, this can be more or less harm, and it may be more positive for your workplace. Like if you fire a toxic employee who was bringing down morale, or who wasn't working, wasn't doing their job, or someone who was, leaking secrets to competitors. There are a number of ways where firing someone can be a positive for the business owner or the people working there. But more often than not, it is a negative to fire one. It doesn't take it back to zero. This is also part of this hyper-capitalist mindset that the employers, the business owners, are doing you a favor by hiring you and paying you whatever starvation wage they can get away with. So we got a 2-for-1 here. We've got homophobia, LGBT phobia, and this hyper-capitalist, the business owners are doing you a favor, you should be grateful mindset. Gotta love when those two come together.
Stop hiring and selling to black people, and so they become impoverished, starving, and eventually die. And the claim is that their right to life has therefore been violated. This is a misunderstanding of how the right to life works. The right to life is actually a bit of a misnomer. It technically doesn't exist. No one has the right to be alive. Instead,
you have... So are you going to, you and your posse going to end your arguments against abortion and let people make decisions about their bodies as they choose? I mean, if the right to life isn't really a thing, then... Oh no, you only care about right to life when it removes women's bodily autonomy. Right.
The right to not have your life taken from you. In the same way that the right to bear arms doesn't mean that you're entitled to be given guns. It means that your guns can't be taken from you if you obtain them. The right to private property doesn't mean that you need to be given things. It just means that people cannot take your things. This is the difference between negative rights and positive rights. Negative rights prevent people from harming you. Positive rights obligate people to help you. And it is my contention that positive rights cannot exist by definition of what rights are. If you have a positive right to life...
What? Okay, yes, serious ANCAP libertarian vibes from this dude already. There is no such... Positive rights cannot exist. You cannot be obligated to... You cannot be obligated to help people. Come on, dude. This is someone who basically believes that everyone's position in life, everyone's station in life is due 100% only to their own choices, that their parents' or grandparents' situation had no impact on it, and if you're poor, it's because you don't work hard enough. If you're wealthy, it's because you do work hard enough. And that's just not how the world works. We have data to prove that if your parents are poor, you will probably also be poor. If your grandparents were poor, your parents were probably also poor, so you will also probably be poor. If your parents were wealthy, you probably also will be wealthy. So this whole idea is it fits with a hyper fundamentalist Christian idea, sure, but it also, again, completely ignores that being gay is not a choice. It just is who you are. If you are gay, you are gay. You can't do anything about that without suffering some severe mental strain, which no one should have to go through. So it's a harm to fire someone for almost any reason. And especially if it is because they are gay and there's no longer any protection for gay people in hiring and firing practices. Because all of a sudden you'll see a bunch of people being like, fags need not apply. No gays allowed. We don't hire sinners. Because suddenly that's okay. And it's not okay.
Then you have a right to the basic needs required to sustain your life, like healthcare. But here's the problem. Healthcare relies on the voluntary service of other people. And if a service is voluntary,
I've only ever heard ANCAPs and libertarians use voluntary this many times in response to things which most people accept are natural human rights, like healthcare. So this is the Ben Shapiro talking point, that people who claim healthcare is a human right insist that doctors will be enslaved and forced to work. And no. We have absolutely enough wealth in this nation to pay quite well for the quality of healthcare we have. But right now, so much of what people pay for healthcare just goes into the insurance companies' pockets. So this is a non sequitur. This has nothing to do with gay people being fired and that being fired for being gay being against the law. And yeah, the thing is about like Medicare for all, like Bernie Sanders' proposal, was that there will still be demand. And even if it's somewhat less commodified in a market economy, which we exist in, as long as there's demand, there will be incentives for people to supply it. So if you think that making healthcare universal will somehow make doctors mean that doctors will be paid minimum wage, it's a fallacy. It's a non sequitur.
it can be denied, as people can just choose not to perform it. And if a service can be denied, it cannot be a right, because rights by definition cannot be denied. The only alternative is to say that
That's absurd. Your right to free speech can be denied, but we still recognize it as a human right. What are you... This is absurd and completely tangential to what this video is supposed to be about.
these services cannot be denied.
He's being incoherent.
But they're not voluntary. But that would...
I mean, he's not incoherent in that I don't understand what he's saying. Incoherent in that he's not arguing anything about the Supreme Court's LGBTQ ruling. Because it's not that we're viewing, unless I misunderstand the legislature, we're not saying that having a job is a human right. I don't believe that is part of the U.S. legal system at this point. I think maybe it should be, but so what you're saying is that if what you're saying is that having a job is not a right, then being denied a job by being fired is not a violation of this right, which doesn't exist. Which, in your worldview, I understand where you're saying that, but that's not how it works in reality. We're not saying that having a job is a right. We're saying that to protect workers, employers need valid reasons to fire them. Otherwise, they're entitled to unemployment until they get another job. So, in Iowa, where I live, someone absolutely can be fired for being gay, as long as the person firing them doesn't say, "We're firing you because you're gay." It's called right to work legislation, which is the biggest fucking dumb name. Basically, either party can sever ties at any time for any reason, which means that you can be fired for any reason. But if they don't have a valid reason, you get unemployment. At least that's how I understand it works. So, what this legislation is saying is that if someone is fired for being gay, if you can prove that you were fired for being gay, then you can win a wrongful termination suit. Whereas right now, in Iowa, they just don't say things like that. So I guess I don't get what this whole argument, what he's trying to prove here with the medical care, healthcare is not a human right, so the LGBTQ ruling is immoral.
Necessarily violate human rights, as involuntary servitude is slavery. If hypothetically there were no doctors to provide healthcare,
and this is ignoring that capitalism itself is basically run on involuntary servitude. They just get compensated in some, menial to magnificent way, and so it's not slavery. So, again, nothing to do with the LGBTQ ruling, but an incorrect argument as well.
Healthcare is a human right and thus can't be denied, then that would demand forcing people to become doctors against their will. In this hypothetical, being unlikely doesn't matter. If you just
see, this is why I never understood this argument, or why people thought it was never understood why people thought it was a good argument. Because this is assuming that all the people currently trained and working as doctors will suddenly stop working as doctors, and no one else will train to be doctors. Which implies that the only reason why people are doctors today is because of the six-figure salary they can command. Which, I'll acknowledge, there are definitely some people who become doctors for the six-figure income and access to pharmaceuticals. But there are a number of people, I would posit the majority of people, who become doctors because they think it's a good profession, because it's what they want to do, because they want to help people. And while many doctors might see a pay cut under a Medicare for all system, under a universal healthcare system, I doubt it would be down to starvation wages. When you're making $100,000, $200,000 a year, a 10% pay cut still puts you in the top 5% of the United States, top 10%. They'll be fine.
Dismiss an argument by saying that it's just a hypothetical, you're missing the point of hypotheticals. The point of a hypothetical is to test your position by taking it to its logical extreme.
True, Magmill. Imagine a conclave of 200 people, the last humans alive. No doctors, and then we just agree to die off because nobody feels like reading a medical textbook. At least we die free, boys. True.
This method is formally known as a reductio ad absurdum, or reduction to absurdity, where you demonstrate that a position necessarily leads to absurd contradictory conclusions, and therefore cannot be.
My understanding of the reductio ad absurdum is that it's used to test a theory by putting the most absurd, ridiculous endpoint on it. But your assumption for your reductio ad absurdum is that universal health care would mean that doctors no longer get paid for their service, which is not a proposal anyone has made. No one has said that doctors would go unpaid in a universal system. I try to avoid it as much as possible, but he brought it up first.
Be accepted. In this case, the postulation of positive rights contradicts the entire notion of human rights. Therefore, positive rights cannot exist. But most people don't think about this. They just want to call things like healthcare a human right because it sounds good. They feel like woke.
I think people have thought about this more than you have, because that was an absurd statement.
Activists, when they say it, they don't realize all of the implications that come with such a label. For something to be a human right is a very significant thing. It's not a term that should be thrown around lightly anytime you hear a social justice cause and want to virtue signal about it. No one has the right to have their life sustained by other people. If you die, however unfortunate that may be, you die on your own. But wait, Michael, if everyone stops interacting with me and I die as a result, haven't they caused me to die? No, because again, in the same way that not helping someone is not harming them, letting someone die is not killing them. There's no causal element. They die.
That depends on why everyone stopped interacting with them. If they stopped interacting with them because they didn't have the money to continue paying them, then I would say that's an immoral system, depending on why they didn't have the money. But, there's plenty of reasons why someone would stop being interacted with. And again, we already have this kind of, to use your words, slavery in the medical care system, where people can go to emergency rooms and receive whatever treatment they need to not die, no matter their ability to pay. Now, oftentimes this means that unless they manage to give false information and get all the way through the situation without them finding it's false information, this means that these people who probably couldn't afford a doctor in the first place, that's why they were going to the emergency room, are saddled with tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. And I think that's immoral, but that's not what you're trying to argue here. You couldn't actually argue that firing people because they're gay is immoral, so you found a tangential argument to try to prove your unprovable point. Oh boy.
Die on their own. But Michael, aren't you still...
I agree, although I think it needs a little bit of brushing, personally. That hair is fucking magnificent, and the fact that he has it is a crime against nature.
Making a choice when you choose not to choose to help me?
And a crime against me specifically.
Isn't an action itself still action? Yes, no matter what, you're committing an action. But not all actions are causal. When I act by working out in the morning, I don't cause the sky to be blue. Something else does. If my friend flicks over a line of dominoes and I choose not to interrupt it and they fall down, I didn't cause them to fall over. My friend did. Yes, my inaction was action, but it didn't cause them to fall over.
That's absurd. No. This is completely disconnected from reality. Holy balls! If your friend tips over a line of dominoes and you know that at the end of that line of dominoes is a button which detonates a bomb that kills, that detonates a bomb in an orphanage somewhere, you are at least partially responsible for not preventing that bomb from being detonated. If you fail to stop the chain of dominoes. Your friend is responsible for flicking them over in the first place, but you are also responsible, through inaction, for preventing that explosion. That is a reductio done properly, as I understand it. But that's my whole point. Why someone refuses to interact with you is important in determining the morality there, because if someone, and again, this is completely tangential. I feel like this is someone who has read an introductory to philosophy book and a whole bunch of books about how fundamental Christianity has everything right and thinks they're making good arguments, but he's not. There's no solid argument here.
It simply let it happen. Those dominoes were going to fall over with or without my inaction. If I didn't exist at all, they still would have fallen over, which means that it's logically impossible for me to have been
Yeah, exactly, Magno. True.
causally responsible. But Michael, you could have stopped it and you chose not to. Sure, you can call me a terrible person if I let a bad thing happen, but you cannot accuse me of causing it. And if I didn't cause it, you can't accuse me of violating rights, because
But if you could have prevented it and didn't, at least according to my moral framework, then, and as I understand it, most people's moral framework, if you have the option to prevent something which will cause harm and do not do so, then you are as guilty of allowing that harm to happen as the person who initiated the action. Again, your friend flicked over the dominoes. He's responsible for what happens from that point. You are also responsible if you fail to stop them. If they get to the end and press a button that detonates that bomb at an orphanage, you are just as responsible as he is because your inaction led to that action being completed. This is like morality 100. This isn't even like we haven't even got the trolley problem where if I stop them, an orphanage blows up. But if I don't stop them, an orphanage blows up. But if I do stop them, my grandmother dies. There's some actual dilemma. There's some, the needs of the many versus there's an argument. There is some discussion to be had there. But you're not even making good, solid premises for your arguments.
violating rights is an explicitly causal thing. Someone being a terrible person has nothing to do with if they're violating rights. Consider the following scenarios. In one, I choose to not give money to the homeless for whatever reason. Let's say I'm saving up money. In the other, I choose to not give money to the homeless because I hate them and want them to be poor. In both scenarios, I'm allowed to not give money to the homeless, even though in one of them, my motivations are immoral. This is because my motivations have nothing to do with if I'm harming them. This is the same principle that the left uses to justify abortion.
Correct. Yes. Not about the left and abortion thing. But yes, your intentions generally have little to do with... Now, they can mitigate certain things, but generally speaking, refraining from giving money to the poor is... This is kind of one of those gray areas where most people would agree it's moral to give money to the poor, to homeless people, but it's not immoral to not give money. That's an argument. So your reason for doing it is irrelevant. That's why now a lot of modern legal philosophy, as I understand it, is predicated on a deontology, where an act can be moral or immoral in itself, which the problem I have with deontology is that there are a number of acts which would be considered immoral but can be done for moral reasons, which kind of tells me that, like, again, to use the example, a common example is there's someone who is going to someone's going to assassinate a popular politician or celebrity or whatever, and you have the opportunity to stop them, but you have to kill them. Like, you're using an instant death poison knife or something, whatever. It's wrong to kill people, according to most people. But in that case, are you preventing greater harm by this one act of immoral action of killing this person? I mean that's one of the issues with deontology. I'm not here to get into the specifics of moral philosophy, deontology, blah 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 blah. Because we were supposed to be talking about how the Supreme Court's ruling is immoral, and you've gone on for like 6 minutes about how universal health care proves that positive rights are can't exist or some crap.
And again, I'll probably lose some subscribers for saying this, but abortion, as immoral as it may be, is a woman's right because it's her body and she shouldn't be forced to sustain
Holy shit. Pro-choice fundy. Never thought I'd see the day.
dependencies on it. And I'm not making a feminist argument. If men could get pregnant, it'd be the same thing. For the
Men can get pregnant. Trans men. I mean, it's rare. Usually the hormones prevent that kind of thing, but if for some reason they're not on hormones, then yeah, men can get pregnant. No problem.
same reason that if someone needed a kidney to live and you were the only person who could give them one and you'd be fine without it, you would still have the right to say no because it's yours. But the left ignores this principle when it's inconvenient for them. They stop caring about freedom the moment the topic of free speech comes up or taxing the rich. They don't care about the principles, only the outcomes. They reason
more lefties are utilitarians and consequentialists than righties are, in my experience. And yeah, lefties are more concerned about outcomes than individual actions because we understand material conditions, historical materialism, which tells us that individual actions can have far-reaching outcomes down the line. So we have to consider what the potential outcomes, and I would consider this just rational for anyone trying to discuss putting a policy into action. You want to discuss the potential effects of it. Maybe I'm the crazy one here, but I feel like if you're trying to if you want to create good outcomes, you want to make sure that the policies you're putting forward will have good outcomes and consider the potential outcomes of them. It was a little wordy, but got my point across. Like, if you're proposing solutions and not considering the potential outcomes, the potential permutations, I don't expect someone to have memorized and figured out all the potential outcomes of something they propose. But if you're not at least considering the immediate and obvious outcomes, then I think you're doing policy wrong.
backwards. What they'll do is they'll look at an outcome and decide that they don't like it, and then try to outlaw it, not taking into consideration any of the principles or processes that resulted in the outcome to begin with.
Examples? Pleased to be showing a time when the left picked out an outcome they didn't like and tried to outlaw that outcome without trying to address the situation or system which led to that outcome. Please explain.
They'll think about businesses being racist and not interacting with black people, and think businesses shouldn't be racist, I don't like that, and then try to outlaw it, ignoring the principle of liberty that allows businesses to do that. They'll hear a presidential candidate
What? The reason why businesses are racist is because people are racist. And there are a couple of ways to address that. We can address people in education to try to break the cycle of racism, but that's tough to do, particularly given that a lot of racism is learned before they get into the school system. And it can be very difficult to unlearn that stuff unless you want to. So another way, the sort of neoliberal way is to try to legislate away racism, which basically just catches the aesthetics of racism. You can't say certain words. You can't refer to certain people in certain ways. Terminating someone because of certain qualities is wrong. This is how you try to address racism through legislation. And it works to a point. It forces people to be more subtle about their racism. Again, it addresses the aesthetics of racism, but not the actual feelings or knowledge of racism. So it doesn't really work well for that kind of thing. To address racism, we need to address society. We need to address the systems of learning which prejudice one group over another, and create systems which prevent certain racial groups from perpetuating stereotypes that keep them down in the minds of other racial groups. This is like creating opportunities so that black people can do something to get out of the ghetto besides rapping, baseball, or movies. I mean, like, crime is the other way they can get out, but that's really only they get out to go to jail, which isn't really the kind of outcome we're looking for here.
Advocate for free education and think, I want free education, I like that, and then support them without taking into consideration all of the means that would be required, like increased taxation. This backwards reasoning is called the appeal to consequence fallacy, and it's where you accept or reject a premise based on the desirability of the conclusion, like dogmatic religious people who reject scientific evidence because they don't like the implications it has for their religion, or dogmatic atheists who reject rational arguments for the existence of God because they don't want religion.
Whoa! Those are two completely different things, comrade. Religious people refusing to accept scientific principles because it changes their reality is denying reality. Atheists refusing to accept rational arguments for God is different because there are no rational arguments for the existence of God. Every single argument of God is based on faith or intuition or just a feeling. It's not based on any data. It's not based on any rational data, any rational idea. It's not based on anything we can test. So those are two completely different arguments. They're not two sides of the same coin. They're two different arguments. And again, have nothing to do with the Supreme Court's ruling.
Be true. This thought process is fallacious because whether a premise is
I wish. This video is from 2 weeks ago, Magmo.
True or false has nothing to do with if you like it. Or in the words of Ben Shapiro,
facts don't care about your feelings.
And leftists aren't the only
Holy shit, dude. Check your fucking levels. I apologize for any ear rapes there. That was holy shit. Yeah, I got Shapiro'd. Holy.
only ones who do this. Lots of conservatives are guilty as well. They invoke liberty when the left is trying to restrict their freedom of speech and freedom of religion, but then completely disregard it when it comes to things that they think are immoral, like gay marriage, drug usage, and pornography.
And that's why I want it banned. I want it gone. That's right. I know what you're thinking. But John, the liberals, they want to ban stuff. I don't care. Ban it. Get it out of here. But John, but that's the same thing the libtards say when they want to take away the guns. It's like, yeah, except you have a right to bear arms. You don't have a right to pornography access. It's nothing more than filmed prostitution.
These people don't value liberty as an intrinsic principle. They view it as a political tool to only use when it advances their agendas. They can't handle people doing.
How is it not valuing liberty to take away one of the reasons people have been fired that has nothing to do with their character or their performance? See, in a perfect capitalist world, everyone would get jobs according to their ability and would only receive censure or uh, uh, demerits or whatever you want to call it when they do something wrong or don't perform adequately. Now, we all know that the actual impact of capitalism is constant growth, and so what was once considered rock star out of the park performance is now just barely squeaking by passing. I have seen this my own self. I worked at a call center for 5 years. 4.5 of those years were in a specific satellite radio company. Specifically, our site was what is known as a save site or retention. When I started there, the minimum goal to be on goal and bonus was 45% saves. That means that out of every 100 saves calls you take, you manage to retain 45 customers from them. By the time I left that company to go to a different client in the call center, the minimum for your minimum goal to just bonus and be good was 55%. And so there were people who, when I started there, were considered out of this world rock stars. Just these people are held up as an example to the rest of what you can do, how you can do it. This is some good quality, because they were doing like 56, 57, 58, 60% saves. And by the end, these people were looking, by the time I left, these people would have been, most of them had quit or been fired by then. But those who were left were basically held as doing the bare minimum and the kind of people who were receiving write-ups for not getting enough saves. They didn't change anything about the structure. They didn't make the service cheaper. In fact, the price had gone up in that time. They hadn't done anything to make people less likely to quit. In fact, arguably, they'd done more to make people quit by running more ads on different channels and yada yada, a bunch of stuff to less value for your money. But they still expected more performance out of their agents. And that was because they kept getting more performance out of their agents. That is capitalism in a nutshell. If you meet or exceed your goals, especially if you exceed your goals by a significant amount, then eventually your goal is going to be that exceeding number. And they're going to wonder, yesterday you produced 10 units, you're only supposed to produce 8, so let's see, you get 10 units today. Okay, so you do, and you get 11 units. So you produce 11 units for a couple of days, and they're like, well, new minimum is 12 units. So you're busting your ass to get 10 units. You busted your ass a little bit more to get 11 units, and now every day they want you to do 12 units. You're not getting paid more. Maybe if there's some sort of bonus structure, you might get some small bonus for getting it. But again, most bonus structures are based around people exceeding the minimums, or exceeding the maximums, really. Yeah, June 19th, 2020 is when this video was released. Pretty positive it's not 2005.
Doing things that they don't like. The best term that I can think of to describe it is caveman morality, right? They think, you're doing this thing and I don't like it, so you can't do it. It's so shallow and childish, right? Learning how to mind your own business and let other people do their own thing is something you were supposed.
I love how this whole argument could be turned, everything he's saying here could be turned around about why the LGBTQ ruling is perfectly fine. Why should employers care about my sexuality or my being trans? Why should that factor into their calculus at all? Just if you don't like it, I'm not going to shove it in your face. I don't care. It's who I am. Why should it matter? But again, he was supposed to be arguing about how the Supreme Court's LGBTQ ruling is immoral, but he stopped doing that about 2 minutes in.
supposed to learn as a child. But Michael, what about the good of the community? What if everyone starts doing these things? Then oh well. If everyone else wants to be degenerative, then that's their choice. You can leave if you don't like it. You're not entitled to live in any specific type of society, because society is comprised of other people, and you're not entitled to other people. Now finally you might ask, but Michael, why should I have to follow the principle of liberty if I don't value it? Aren't you contradicting yourself by forcing it on me? No, because by even asking that question, you are affirming liberty. Because liberty is the principle that you should not have to follow principles that you don't value. Applying that principle to itself is self-defeating. It cannot be done. You're basically saying, I don't value the principle that I shouldn't have to follow principles that I don't value. Therefore, I shouldn't have to follow it. You're appealing to the mechanism.
Okay, yeah, I'm done here. This dude is fucking incoherent. There are plenty of people who apply the principle of liberty to justify fascism. Like, it's not... But by his argument, fascists are liberals. Now, we all know the truth there, boys, don't we? But no, seriously. This dude is incoherent and doesn't know what he's talking about. He's trying to mask a complete ignorance on the subject with some high-level vocabulary about philosophy and morality. Like, we didn't even get to talk much about the LGBTQ ruling because he pretty much went off of that right away to try to demonstrate how it was granting a positive right, but positive rights can't exist. I regret watching this. This guy's a fucking idiot. And again, I apologize for the Shapiro rape. Hey, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the show. Remember to like, share, and leave a comment because it helps me. Subscribe and ring that bell to help you. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.